Well, hello everybody. Today we're going to start a reading of a different book. I'm going to continue on with the one I've been reading, which is Rosicrucian Wisdom by Rudolf Steiner. If you've been following along, then you're aware of that. But I'm going to start reading some other books alongside it. Now, maybe not more than one, maybe just this one, but we'll see. Because I think it's important, to have different levels of understanding mixed in there for people who are more advanced and who have already done the research. Maybe they're comfortable listening to Steiner and grasping what Steiner says. I know for me personally, it took me a long time to understand what it was that Steiner was saying, because I personally believe his material is a bit difficult when you're first starting off. Some of the concepts he covers, such as like ether bodies, astral bodies. I mean, how does the average person jump into material like that without being highly skeptical? I completely get it. I mean, there's some stuff that Steiner says, even to this day, where I'm like, I get it. I don't have personal experience of every single thing that he talks about, so some of it is not provable unless you have the personal experience. But what the study of the symbolism and kind of the other, I don't want to say genres of material because it's really all the same genre, but there's just other avenues of study that can help kind of open your eyes and make it make sense, make what Steiner's saying make sense, right? Because I don't expect anybody to just jump in and listen to a book where Steiner's talking about ether bodies and astral bodies and all these other parallel worlds that are kind of happening around us. I don't really expect anybody to just be able to jump in with 2 feet and be like, yeah, sounds reasonable. Because we're not taught to think that way. And if we don't have the foundation to understand exactly what it is that he's saying and why it makes sense. See, I'm the type of person that's like, make it make sense to me. I mean, anybody can say anything, and unless I've got like a logical breakdown and I can make it make sense, I'm not going to believe it. You know what I mean? So I think that's important. Also, just another thing, news-wise here, kind of as far as the channel goes, if you see the logo change, that might be upcoming here in the near future. Don't be alarmed. As much as I like, Thomas Jefferson there, that's probably a temporary pick, and the name of the channel might change too. I've got some ideas. I've got a logo that I made a long time ago that I designed myself, and might put that up on there. And then as we grow and as I see fit, I may start producing items to help support the channel and whatnot, such as like shirts, logos, mugs, whatever the case may be. However, I will say this, that I will never compromise material to fall in line with what a corporation says. So, and also sticking true to the tradition in Rosicrucianism. All the information I ever put out, which is not even my information, obviously I'm just reading, but anything, I honestly believe that this information is not to be monetized. That doesn't mean that people can't be compensated for efforts they put in, but this information should never be monetized solely just to get the information. It is like highly against the esoteric doctrine. People like Heindel and Hall, of course they were compensated for the work they put into their masterpieces and whatnot. That's to be expected. You got to be compensated for time and effort you put into something, but as far as making profit off material like some people do, I think it's just highly unethical. So if there are ways that actually enable me to continue doing what I want to do, while being able to support myself from, selling like whatever it may be, shirts, merchandise, stuff like that, to grow the channel, then I will do that. But I'll never compromise material, and I'll never compromise my own ethics to fall in line with a corporation or anything like that. You just will never get that out of me. So, just to be clear there. All right, let's go ahead and start. We're going to start here. This is a book called How to Understand Your Bible by Manly P. Hall. Chapter 1, The Sources of Sacred Writings. In spite of human prejudice to the contrary, there is but one religion and one truth, and all of the great faiths of the world are parts or fragments of the ancient wisdom. The scriptures of the world are the written records devised both to preserve and at the same time to conceal the secrets of the 49 branches of the eternal law. It naturally follows that there is a certain interdependence between religious writings. To understand any one sacred book completely, it is necessary to understand all other sacred books. It has been difficult for human beings to accept this truth, and for lack of interreligious understanding, there has been very little religious understanding. Each man, clinging to his own book, hugging to his heart his own fragment of the law, has believed that there is a peculiar virtue in proclaiming a part and denying the rest. Bibles, so-called, are collections of inspired writings and the recording of ancient oral traditions. They are accumulated over immense periods of time and can usually be traced to the lore of preceding civilizations. Built up from earlier fragments, they should never be regarded as revelations in the sense of being delivered in toto to any individual by some divine being. The revelation factor is generally limited to interpretation. Some illumined individual, contemplating sacred matters, perceives some deeply concealed value, and by placing special emphasis upon this new aspect, comes to be regarded as a religious founder. Among ancient peoples, sacred writings were reserved for the contemplation of initiated priests and were not available to the laity. The priests interpreted such parts of the scriptures as applied to the problems of the occasion. The populace gathered before the temple received their spiritual instruction from initiates of the priestly orders who stood upon the porch of the holy house and solemnly expounded the laws. These priests were equipped with the keys to the scriptural allegories by which they were enabled to unlock the profounder meanings of the spiritual tradition. After the decline of the mysteries, when the sacred books fell into the hands of the profane, the subtler values were lost. The Vedas, the sacred books of the ancient Aryan Hindus, appear to be the oldest of the scriptural writings and the source of most of the sacred books now venerated throughout the world. The religious traditions of the ancient Hindus are of incredible antiquity. The traditions of these people indicate that the laws and institutes of the gods were revealed to the progenitors of the Aryans in the highlands of the Himalaya mountain country. Excuse me. Himalaya mountain country nearly 1 million years ago. The migration of the Aryan tribes, first southward and then westward, resulted in the establishment of several sub-races and cultures. The migrating tribes carried with them the sacred traditions of their ancient gods. With the development of writing, the records passed from the memoirs of priests and scribes to the more permanent and impersonal media of stone, clay, and papyrus. From the Vedas poured forth the streams of religious tradition which, flowing into various nations down through the ages, appeared in the course of time as the single source of the numerous scriptural writings of the world. Great saints and sages, interpreting this ageless wisdom, wrote their commentaries or restated in the terms of their own day the Vedic lore and the sacred tradition. In China, Lao Tzu and Confucius were the interpreters, and their writings have become scripture. In India, Buddha was the great emissary. In Persia, it was Zoroaster. In Egypt, Akhenaten and Hermes. In Greece, Orpheus, Pythagoras, and Plato. In Syria, it was Moses, and later Jesus. According to the teachings of the old initiates, the spiritual tradition was likened to a flame burning forever upon the altar of the gods. The flame was divided into 7 flames, and these in turn were again divided into 7, the result being 49 fires, or the 49 spiritual revelations, called in the Kabbalah of Moses the 49 gates of the law. Thus, out of the one eternal truth came forth the 7 world religions, each in turn divided into 7 lesser parts, altogether constituting the divine wisdom. The Christian Bible is the principal sacred book of the Western world. It is usually divided into 2 parts, and occasionally into 3 parts by the insertion between the Old and New Testaments of the Apocrypha, or, in quotations here, doubtful books. The Old Testament sets forth the secret doctrine in Israel. It is a Kabbalistic book, almost unintelligible without the assistance of certain commentaries. The New Testament derives its teachings from the Essene mystics of Syria, the Mithraic cultists of Persia, the Seraphic rites of the Egyptians, the Simonian Gnosis also of Syria, and the Neoplatonism of Alexandria. The unknown authors of the Gospels were, of course, men learned in comparative religious systems of their day. It is futile at this time to engage in speculation or controversy as to the identity of these writers. It is sufficient to say that they possessed a working knowledge of the secret doctrine, and purposefully contrived to conceal this knowledge in what is made to appear an historical narrative of the life and works of an individual. Like the Christian revelation, the Old Testament in the Mosaic tradition sets forth under the guise of history an elaborate metaphysical system derived directly from the older Egyptian lore, indirectly from Chaldea, Phoenicia, and India. Moses was an initiate of the secret schools of Egypt, and the Pentateuch, usually ascribed to Moses, is the surviving remnant of the most profound teachings. It is quite unlikely that the Pentateuch has descended to the present time in anything resembling its original form. There is considerable evidence that the true books of Moses were lost in the night of time. But whatever the case, it is certain that the ancient wisdom, although somewhat distorted in form, still survives in the Old Testament writings, and 2, that it can be extracted therefrom with the aid of certain keys and patient, illumined research. A reasonable interpretation of the biblical writings is one based upon a system of cross-reference in which all the great schools of ancient religion and philosophy are considered as one composite structure. Thus, each system is interpreted in the light of the others. As each religion has been built up from innumerable older beliefs, the understanding of these various background beliefs is absolutely essential. The gaps in one system, where the tradition has been mutilated or lost, can be filled in from the other systems of similar tradition. If the work is painstakingly done, the result is a complete picture by which the student is able to comprehend the correct meaning of obscure passages and fill in perplexing vacancies. The important thing is to be sure that the building in is done from the same stream of tradition as the religion that is being reconstructed. So just a quick little recap there. when you're reading scripture from any tradition, you are reading about one truth, the truth of how nature works. And there's hidden things within nature that we do not understand to this day, that our forefathers and ancestors had an intuitive wisdom of. This has all been lost. When humanity became bent toward the intellectual side, became off balance to the intellectual side of things, and to the more physical side of things as well, we lost a lot of this intuitive wisdom. So what Hall's telling us here is that he's just kind of highlighting that all these traditions are a piece of this much larger puzzle, that when you plug these things into each other, and when you have the keys to the allegories, because it's all written in allegorical, symbolic language, it's a lot of it's metaphor, but it'll be a metaphor on one level, and then you'll study it and you'll get these much deeper meanings that will come to you if you're persistent, and then you'll see that the metaphors are also literal on a much higher level. And that can only be described, only people that have gone through that will understand that. Like I've said, when you're studying this stuff, it is like one of those 3D pictures. One of those 3D pictures that when you're looking at it, if you have no experience with it, you won't see it. You'll just see a bunch of colorful blobs on a piece of paper, and you'll be like, that's nothing. What are you even talking about? And you got this person over here like, no, it's an image. Oh, wow, it's a 3D image. I can see depth in that thing. Holy crap. And then you got this other guy, and he's like, you're crazy. There's absolutely nothing there. So, like, until you see it, you can't see it, but it is there. Okay, let's continue. Biblical theory of creation. The cosmogony of the Jews is derived directly from the Chaldean and Egyptian. This has been proved beyond any question of doubt by the discovery of cuneiform tablets, much older than the Jewish Bible, which contain many of the stories set forth in the opening chapters of Genesis. It is quite possible that the Old Testament originally contained a much more amplified account of the creation, but certainly it is still possible to make much more of the book of Genesis than the average churchman has accomplished. With the aid of the Jewish and Kabbalistic commentaries, Genesis is amplified into a rational account of the beginning of the universe, far more vital, significant, and impressive than the accepted theological version. A great scholar observed in the last century that the Christian theology, and of course he included Jewish cosmogony, was the only system believed by the more advanced races of the earth to insist that God made the universe out of nothing. The gods. The book of Genesis opens with a simple and dramatic statement which has been anglicized into the most impressive sentence in the English literature. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. This verse seemingly presents no problem, but the more a searching student thinks about it, in the more... Let me just stumbled there. Let me say this again. This verse seemingly presents no problem, but the more a searching student thinks about it, the more fully he will realize that into 10 words has been compressed a cosmic process involving hundreds of millions of years of time and innumerable complicated mysteries. Only an elaborate commentary can make this verse partly intelligible to the human mind entirely ignorant of divine and cosmic procedures. We must first define the word God as it is used in this case, and throughout the first chapter of the Bible. The word in Hebrew is not God or Jah or Jehovah, but Elohim. God is a reverent but entirely insufficient word to convey the true meaning of Elohim. Most important to be considered are two facts. First, in Hebrew, Elohim is an androgynous term, inferring a combination of male and female attributes. Second, the word, by its termination, is plural. Actually, therefore, the word Elohim means the male-female creators, representing a host or at least a group of powers, and not under any condition a single personal entity. The words heaven and earth are also misleading through inadequate translation. By heaven and earth should be understood a superior and inferior condition, a separation of qualities, not a division of space. The average reader will think of heavens as the firmament and earth as the planet, and this interpretation will destroy entirely the significance of the verse. It would be better to interpret heaven and earth as spirit and matter, or the subtle and the gross, in the sense of vibration or qualities of life and vitality. The words "in the beginning" also present difficulties. The wise student will interpret them as "from that which is first," or "in eternal principles," or "that which was in the beginning." This leaves only the word "created," and here again misunderstanding is almost inevitable. The human mind customarily conceives creation as the making of something that is new. But if we think about it, we will realize that in creating any physical thing, creation is only a new pattern made up of already existing factors. Thus, if a man creates a picture, he requires the aid of paints and brushes and canvas. The creation is the inward inspiration which applies these instruments for the release of an idea. Creation in this verse thus implies formation or manifestation, the arranging of ever-existing elements into new patterns to be the vehicles of purpose. With these thoughts in mind, let us read again the verse according to a fuller understanding of its meaning. From the eternal principles and essences, the androgynous creator gods manifested forth the positive and negative aspects of being. Having thus clarified interpretation, we can bring to bear upon it such commentary matter from ancient Jewish beliefs as will reveal the full significance of the verse. The Jewish mystics recognized an eternal definitionless principle which they denominated Min Sof. Now he has Min Sof, I think he means Ein Sof here, the boundless. From the Egyptians they derived the teaching that this boundless one possessed three intrinsic aspects or attributes, being life and light. These three as one, and that one formless, ageless, and changeless was the true God, whose most perfect symbol was space, the source and ultimate of all things. Periodically, according to great cycles, space caused to emerge from its own nature primordial unity, the objectification of being, life, and light. This first manifestation was called the open eye and was designated by the Kabbalists Keter, the crown of the eternal glory. Min Sof, the absolute, was life in suspension. Keter, the firstborn of the absolute, was life in expression. Let me just interject here. I'm not sure why they've got it as MN Sof. That's the first time I've ever seen it written like that. I think it means Ein Sof. I believe it's like AIN Sof. Maybe this is just another way of expressing it. And then I believe there's another level called Ein Sof Or. I'm having trouble remembering which one's above the other right now, though. I'll have to go look. Anyway, not important. Just figured I'd highlight that. Within the nature of Keter was manifested polarity, which is the foundation of activity. The polarities were called Abba, the father, and Ima, the mother. Abba was the positive manifestation of spirit as force, energy, and power. Ima was the negative manifestation of spirit as matter, substance, and receptivity. From the union of Abba and Ima, energy and substance was produced form. According to the Kabbalists, the Elohim, or the creator gods, were the progeny of the union of life and matter. It was the Elohim, in turn, moving in space, who brought forth the mundane universe over which they ruled. By mundane is meant not the physical world, but the metaphysical system, of which the physical creation is the lowest or seventh part. This first manifestation or agitation was equivalent to the conception of the universe in all its parts, like the planting of a seed from which was to grow the worlds. It is the first motion in the absolute. The comparison in other religious systems checks and justifies the speculations of the Jewish mystics. In the northern Tibetan system, the meditations of Adi Buddha, universal consciousness, produces the 7 Dhyani Buddhas, or the 7 modes of consciousness by which the world is formed. In the teachings of the Persians, the supreme nature, Ahura Mazda, manifested the Amisha Spentas, who become the formators of the lower worlds. In the Egyptian Hermetic teachings, the Elohim are the governors or the cosmocrators. In the ancient Egyptian system, they were the Ammonian artificers, the servants of Ta, who, fashioning the egg of the universe upon a potter's wheel, The Elohim are also the seven cabin of Samothrace, the 7 rays upon the golden crown of the Gnostic lion, the sacred 7, the unwritten vowels, which together make up the name of the manifested divinity, the 7 colors of the spectrum, the 7 days of creation, the 7 seals of revelation, the eternally recurring septenary, by which art, music, and physics are bound together, are the Elohim, the 7 breaths that move upon the deep. The formation of the worlds. The second verse of Genesis states, "And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." Interpreted according to the mystical tradition, this would read, "And the below, the passive aspect of being, was formless and devoid of manifested life, and darkness or oblivion filled the whole expanse. The spirits of Elohim moved, impregnated, and enlivened the essence of the negative principle." In some of the Hindu works, this motion of the Elohim is referred to as the curdling of space into the worlds. The 7 modes of intelligence, which are the personification of the 7 laws of nature, which are in turn the 7 wills of the spirit, began to manifest patterns. They were the first in nature of vortices, called in the Sefer Yetzirah the whirlwinds. One form of this theogonic myth declares that the universe was created by the deity speaking the sacred word. Of course, the word was made up of the 7 vowels of the Elohim, which together are the fiat, which issues as a host of living powers from the lips of the Creator. In the North Asiatic tradition, the 7 sons of the Eternal establish their foundation in the deep. Seated in the 6 directions of space, 6 of the builders turn upon the 7th, who is placed in the center, and is called the immovable. In the Kabbalah, the center is called the Holy Temple, the Sabbath of eternal rest, around which moves 6 days of creation. And if you think of your interlaced triangles, which form what has popularly been called the Star of David, but which is the seal of Solomon, also the sigil of Saturn. If you take a look at that, the two interlaced triangles create 6. That's the 6-pointed star. And then in the center, you have your immovable. And this represents the solar system. So does the candelabra of Judaism. All the candles represent the solar system. Anyway, let's continue here. And not to say that's all it represents, like Hall just said there. These are actually energies which manifest themselves in many different ways through a septenary. So when you take light and shine it through a prism, and when you're able to create that rainbow, you're actually tapping in and visually seeing the Elohim. You're just seeing them in the form of the rainbow. But those are the energies. What's producing those colors are these hidden energies which created the world we live in, the entire universe. In the Kabbalah, the higher powers do not descend into the lower elements to ensoul the mundane diffusion, but rather to cast their shadows upon the deep or the lower elements. In the teachings of Lamaism, we have a somewhat similar statement. The meditating Dhyani Buddhas dream themselves into the illusion of matter, causing a certain part of their own consciousness to assume the illusion of existence, though ever meditating above it. The shadows of the Elohim, descending into the depths of matter, result in the formation of 4 levels or planes of illusion, which the old Jewish philosophers called worlds. These planes correspond roughly to the levels of spirit, mind, soul, and body in man. In each of the 4 worlds, the 7 Elohim are reflected, to become in all 28, which cause them to be associated in symbolism with the lunar month and its 4 weeks of 7 days. The ancient Jewish priests had peculiar veneration for the moons, their faith being a lunar cult. As we know, Jehovah is a moon god. That gets left out when we're just generally speaking about Judaism many times, but that is the case. Only the lowest of the 4 worlds was involved in the physical creation. This lower or 4th world was made up of 7 parts or planes, the shadows of the 7 Elohim. Of the 7 planes which make up the mundane sphere, 6 are superphysical, and 1, the lowest, is physical. The 6 superphysical planes are called causal, and are the source of the energies and patterns which manifest or flow into and through the 7th. The 7th and lowest diffusion of the 4th world is that with which the creation story in Genesis is concerned. The unfoldment of this physical plane is according to the pattern commonly known as the Chaldean system of cosmogony. In the cosmogony of the Greeks, the material universe is brought into being by 7 gods, each of whom rules over one of the 7 parts of the mundane diffusion. In the Greek system, the gods are Phones, Ouranos, Kronos, Rhea, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. The mundane world consists of 7 interpenetrating spheres, of which 6 are superphysical, and the lowest or 7th is physical. According to this system, the 7th or physical plane is ruled over by Hades, the subterranean god, to symbolize the physical plane as being the farthest removed from the divine energy. So the physical plane is ruled over by Hades, also known as, in our common terminology, hell, right? So, you are, in a sense, in the underworld right now. The 7 days of creation. The description given in Genesis 1, verses 1 to 31, must be understood to represent the gradual development of the physical universe. The Elohim, the gods of the dawn, mold the negative substances of being into the form and pattern of the solar system. Having brought the planets, including the luminaries, into objective existence, the Elohim then take up their homes in the planetary bodies, and, according to the Chaldean Genesis, circle about in their orbits age after age, governing with their celestial splendors the creatures of the lower world. The pattern for the creation of our own solar system applies to all other solar systems in our universal chain. The pattern also applies to all forms of life evolving within solar systems, from suns and planets to grains of sand, electrons and atoms. This is the Kabbalistic teaching concerning the macrocosm and the microcosm, or the greater and lesser creations, each patterned according to the other. This led the Kabbalists to say, comparing man, a microcosm, with the universe, a macrocosm, that, quote, man is a little universe, and the universe is the grand man. This did not mean that the universe actually resembled man in his physical form, but rather that the same system of geometry which patterned man also patterned the world, and that the same essences, principles, and forces were in both. The Elohim say, "Let us make man in our own image," etc. That is, let the lesser creation be patterned after the greater creation, and be similar to it in principle. Medieval theologians insisted that the 7 creative periods called days made up together a week similar in time to a week of mortal calculation. This, the wisest of the ancient philosophers always denied, insisting that the term day in Genesis referred to an age, cycle, or great period of time. Science uses such terms as period or age to signify one of the major divisions in the evolution of the earth and the life evolving upon it. Thus, such terms as the Miocene or Pliocene age or the glacial period. Modern science is of the opinion that the physical earth has existed for from 500 to 1,000 million years. A recent discovery of fossil remains indicates animal life upon the earth at least 175 million years ago. When these figures are compared with the theological opinion that the earth was created by the arbitrary will of God in the 5th millennium BC, it is apparent that science and theology come to a parting of the ways. The biblical scholar does not harbor the delusions, however, which afflict the pious and fanatical theologians who cling desperately to the jot and tittle of the Revised Version. There is abundant confirming evidence to indicate that the Genesis given in the Bible describes processes occurring over a period of at least 1 billion years, and that it describes how the creative forces of nature brought forth sequentially the superphysical bodies of the solar system, then the material planets, and then, shifting perspective to the planet Earth, unfolded the life upon it to its present state. The descent of the Elohim, with their host of spirits into the swirling mists of primordial substance, and their molding of these mists into the sidereal patterns and bodies, constituted the involuntary process, or the descent of spirit into matter. The unfolding of the worlds through the manifestation of ever-improving types of life, or the release of consciousness through a concatenation of improving vehicles, constitutes what what Darwin, not Darling, he's not my darling, what Darwin called evolution. There is no real argument between science and religion. The difficulty is principally due to extremely compressed description of the creative processes given in Genesis. If the reader can take such a statement as, "and God created," and read instead, "and the forces of nature over a great period caused to manifest," most of the difficulties will be overcome. It should be clearly realized that the ancients understood by their gods creative hierarchies, not personal beings performing sorcery in space, but rather aspects of creative intelligence gradually unfolding through their own creations. In the Egyptian rites, it is said that gods impregnated space with themselves, and then the seeds of the divine natures sprouted and grew up to form the universe. The proper attitude is to realize that divinity is evolving in and through the universal formation. Evolution is really eternal life ideating or shining through material organisms as light might shine through a lamp. Evolution is also, therefore, inward life building ever more perfect forms through which to express its own potentialities. The book of Genesis, chapter 1, verses 24 to 26, inclusive, reveals that the ancients were fully aware of man's relationship to the animal world. In the sixth day, both the animal and the human kingdom is formed, the animal manifesting first, and finally man, created in the image or likeness of the Elohim. The first part of the verse 26 requires special emphasis. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Then in the last part of the 27th verse, it says, "Male and female created he them." This is a very confused picture according to the King James Version. That the word God is intended to be plural is evident in the statement, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Here, of course, God should be read Elohim, the Creator. By the word said in each case is to be inferred not to speak, but to will, or to inwardly determine, the same thought that is implied in the Tibetan creation, when the worlds are formed by the meditation or the inward mental determination of the dhyanas. In the Gnostic writings, it is described that the builders each gave to man a certain part of their own nature, so that when he was finally completed, he participated in all of the universal powers and, in addition, possessed the life of the Eternal Father, Ein Sof, the Boundless. So those seven powers, now we understand. So we've got like the seven rays of light. In the Hindu system, you've got your seven chakras. These chakras, or vortices within the body, these energy centers, are a direct result of the cosmos projecting itself into physical matter and creating the human being. All these things, if you pay attention, you'll notice everything correlates through number in these teachings on many different levels of existence, many different planes, the spiritual and the physical. The pre-Adamic man. The condensation of the earth from its nebulous fire mist state required many millions of years. In those ages, there was no time with which to measure the infinite process. Time is man-made. At last, the body of our planet was formed, with the surface of the earth in a molten state and vapors surrounding the whole planet. The earth was not habitable by any creatures that man has a recollection of, although it is taught in the old records that fantastic beings drifted about in the flames. The physical globe floated in a sea of superphysical humidity, termed by the Greeks ether. This gives us the origin of the primitive belief that the continents of Earth floated in a great sea. This ether was not physical, humid vapors rising from the Earth's surface, but the vital ethereal element in which were evolving the forms that were later to descend upon the Earth as species and races of living things. Pay attention there, you'll notice Steiner also describes this exact thing, just in different terminology. Most of the ancient philosophies teach that life descended onto the physical planet from some sphere of superphysical energy which encloses the physical planet. Curiously enough, this old opinion survives, and recent stratosphere explorations have discovered living spores in the stratosphere. A number of scientists have come to the conclusion that space may contain these spores, which, like drops of condensing water, represent seed lives oozed out of the etheric body of the Earth. It is too soon to say what will be the final opinions of scientists upon this matter, but it is also entirely too soon to declare the ancient philosophers to be wrong. Bamy, the German mystic, describes the celestial Adam who dwelt not upon the earth but in the heavens, a term which may infer this etheric diffusion. Certainly, the ancients believed that even the process of incarnation infers the descent of the superphysical principles of man from a humid sphere outside of the earth. This humidity is described by the old mythologists as a river which divides the earth from the outer universe. To the pagans, this river was the Styx, and to the Christians it is the Jordan, with its hosts of the redeemed gathered upon the distant shore. The Greek poets wrote of the herds of souls floating in the mist which divides the world of the living from the world of the dead. By the world of the living is simply meant the physical plane, and by the world of the dead, the superphysical, subjective universe. Although, in fact, the opposite would be more nearly true. Now pay attention to what he said there. I'm going to read it again. The Greek poets wrote of the herds of souls floating in the mist which divides the world of the living from the world of the dead. By the world of the living is simply meant the physical plane, and by the world of the dead, the superphysical, subjective universe. Although, in fact, the opposite would be more nearly true. And the opposite is true when you dig deep within the esoteric understandings. You will find out that the Greeks and the Egyptians did view physical reality as the land of the living dead. In the biblical story, man dwelt in a paradisical sphere before his fall into the mystery of generation. This paradisical sphere was called a garden and has been variously located by religious enthusiasts upon almost every part of the earth's surface. Eden is not, however, on the earth's surface, but above it, or more correctly, in the higher etheric element which encloses the earth in a globe of translucent energy. The four rivers are the four streams of ether or energy which sustain the four kingdoms of the physical world: mineral, vegetable, animal, and human. Man, physically, is nourished by the vital ethers of nature. These ethers now work through him, but in pre-Adamic times he possessed no physical body, and these ethers formed an etheric body. In the midst of Eden was a small area which was termed paradise. The ancients believed this to represent approximately the north polar area of the etheric globe which, like the physical globe, possessed polarity. The study of cell life shows that impregnated cells develop from their north polar caps, and the same is true of planets and all of the cosmic planes. The first connection between the etheric plane and the physical was polar. Therefore, physical life moving downward from the etheric state flowed particularly to the poles, which were the first parts of the physical earth's surface to crystallize. It is therefore stated that in ancient times, millions of years ago, the gods brought the seeds or germs of life first to the earth's polar cap. The descent of the gods is described in Genesis 6:2, where the sons of God saw the daughters of men and took unto themselves wives. By this, we are to understand that the cooling of Earth's surface resulted in the liberation of elements. These elements, moved by the will of the gods, gradually assumed forms and patterns, even as the impregnated cell gradually builds an organism capable of sustaining individual intelligent existence. In the very ancient times, the first bodies were such as air and water, for these responded most easily to the pulses of the creating will. When the vehicles or bodies built up first from the more subtle parts of the physical globe reached a certain degree of development, the spirits dwelling in the ether above, and called in the Bible the sons of God, flowed downward into the new bodies, which are called the daughters of men, or, more correctly, the daughters of manas, or mind, the mind-formed bodies, for the word man literally means mind. While dwelling in the paradisical state, the entities which we now know as men were androgynous, as is explicitly stated. Quote, they were created male and female, end quote. In the old Kabbalah, they are described as having been formed back to back, a male and female organism. More correctly, it is to be inferred that they possessed inwardly the potentialities of both positive and negative powers. Now, if you compare this to embryology, you will see major parallels in this. So picture how an embryo develops, and also kind of picture how he's saying the world has developed. And you're going to find all these parallels, because when you look at embryology, you're looking at a miniature glyph of a macro reality, if that makes sense. The Edenic garden contained not only the rudiments of human existence, but also the other kingdoms which were to manifest. It was therefore a sort of superior earth in which forms of life developed and prepared themselves for physical incarnation, even as the wise in this world are building superphysical bodies in which to function when the race has finished its physical evolution. The name given to the order of life which was to incarnate as human was Adam, which means species, type, or kind. Never for a moment does it infer a single individual. Adam, therefore, correctly means a mode of consciousness, a type with mind, as distinguished from the animal and vegetable kingdoms which do not possess individualized intelligence and therefore are properly termed species. These lower kingdoms have a center of consciousness called a monad, whereas man has evolved his monad into an ego or a center of I-amness. The process of man's entry into physical existence, or the birth of the terrestrial Adam, was preceded by an elaborate evolutionary program. Forms were built up in the material world by a process of natural experimentation. These forms were not habitable by creatures possessing mind, and they passed away in the laboratory of evolution. It was only after hundreds of millions of years of growth and development that forms were generated suitable to the manifestation of the celestial Adam. The forms which were not used, called the mindless, the shadows, and the monsters, are described by Berosus in his Chaldean history as composite beings made up of animals, birds, and fishes with many heads. They are also referred to in the Kabbalah as the kings of Edom, the unbalanced giants who perished in the void. In chapter 6, 4th verse of Genesis, it says, "There were giants in the earth in those days." At last, by the workings of nature, from below upwardly, forms were organized through which the human life wave could come into manifestation. When this process had been consummated, man's consciousness descended into a specially prepared part of what appeared to be the animal kingdom, whereupon this kingdom branched off definitely from the true animal kingdom, resulting in the scientific perplexity concerning the missing link and the origin of human individuality. Such are a few of the reasonable conclusions sustained by the ancient commentaries and cosmological systems to be derived from the early chapters of Genesis. And that concludes Chapter 1 of How to Understand Your Bible by Manly P. Hall. And that's going to do it. We're going on about an hour now, so I'm not going to add any further commentary on this. We will continue on with the next chapter very soon. Like, subscribe, share if you know anybody who would benefit from this information. It's all about the information. So go ahead and share, like, hit the notification bell as well, and all that good stuff. Take care, guys. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.